Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this, the latest in the series of ASFP webinars. We're going to be talking today about the latest updates on the development of the competency pathway. We'll just wait for a few moments while everyone logs in and tries to get in, and then we'll make a start in a couple of seconds. Okay, so numbers seem to have steadied out. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. He says, for once, I'm sat here and I'm not driving. So here we go. It's the usual format for one of our webinars. I'm doing a quick welcome. We've got, as we go through the webinar, which Kate's going to present for us, we've got questions via a Q&A that's open for you. We've got a chat box which I'll keep an eye on as well as we go through. Kate's going to give us a presentation about where we're up to and what we're doing in terms of the development of the competency framework which works within ASFP and also the wider PFP industry. And we'll talk, at the end of it, we'll have a Q&A session hopefully, and then we'll sum up and close. And he says, I'm expecting the next slide to say something along the lines of the fact that we've got a CPD accreditation for this. It's 1 hour CPD's worth of points for this. If you want that CPD, it's info@asfp.org.uk, as you see on the screen, and we'll send that to you. We can do that for you if we can see that you've logged into this live now at 1 o'clock on the 26th of September. We do record this. We do put these up on the ASFP website for people to dial in and watch afterwards. And if you are watching this on catch up, I'm sorry, we can't give you a CPD certificate for 1 hour's worth of CPD on the grounds of that. Okay, I think that's about it for me for this stage. I'm going to hand you over now to our Kate. Kate's been working with us, oh gosh, it seems like forever. It's about what, about 2 years?
Yeah, something like that. A while now.
And Kate's one of those people that when I understand stuff about how the passive fire products work, I understand how the industry works. And then Kate teaches me all about this, is teaching me all this stuff about how competence and training and assessment of competence and all that. And hopefully I'm now getting to the point where I get to use the right words more often than I don't. So on that point, I'm going to hand you over to Kate, and I will see you at the end for the Q&A. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy. So I am Kate Milford. I'm a consultant that specialises in, amongst other things, competence development and management. And throughout my working life, I've supported competence in lots of different ways, kind of robust approaches to improving and recognising competence in lots of different scenarios. So I've worked with companies on their own approaches to workforce development. I've worked at national and regional level in the UK, developing qualifications, apprenticeships and occupational standards. And I've also worked throughout Europe on the European taxonomy of skills, competencies and occupations as well, which was designed to promote and facilitate freedom of movement between the member states. And I'm also currently serving as a member of the Industry Competence Committee for the Built Environment, which we'll talk a little bit about today as well. I've been working with ASFP, I think, for the last 2 years. It feels like a lot longer because when you get stuck into passive fire, you really get stuck in. But it's been a little while now supporting ASFP and their members and the wider sector to look at competence for passive fire protection. Now, it's been a little while since we did an update webinar, but I want to give you a flavour of what we've been doing and what will be coming up soon as we continue with our work. I think it's fair to say it's been a really busy time for us, and we've been working with stakeholders from across passive fire on what competence looks like, the tools that we can put in place to help organisations and industry with demonstrating it. But before we do that, I think it's important that we acknowledge the Phase 2 Grenfell report that came out earlier this month. Now, as we all know, Grenfell and its legacy have really been key drivers for the discussions around competence that we're having today. And the underpinning theme of the messaging that came out of the Phase 1 report and the government since then has really been around culture change and about taking responsibility for our work and taking our commitment to safety seriously. And people and their capabilities have been at the heart of many of those messages, and they still continue to be today. That's really an underpinning theme that's come through all of those reports right into the Phase 2 report. Now, I think we can all agree that some of the statements, in fact, most of the statements that accompanied the report from the panel members when the report came out were extremely emotive. And there was one in particular that stood out for me, and that was made by Thuria Istefan, a practicing architect who also served as a construction specialist inspector with HSE, who was part of the panel that put the report together. And she said, put simply, if you work in the construction industry and you do not feel the weight of responsibility you have for keeping people safe, you are in the wrong job. Now, originally, I put this presentation together the day the report came out, and it's been interesting to me to see how many times this particular statement has been shared. It clearly didn't just catch my attention, but the attention of many others, and I think that's for obvious reasons. I think it's really important for us all to recognise that however we're connected with the construction industry, whatever role we play, it's essential that we remember the responsibility that we have. And from working with many of you within passive fire protection, I think it's really clear to me that you feel the weight of that responsibility very keenly. Now, we're going to be taking some time to look at the report in detail and to look for impact on our work moving forward, particularly in the competence space. So we'll be discussing it with our working groups and having lots of conversations about it through our wider sector work, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later. It's clear, though, from the Phase 2 report that it's very much in line with previous reports in highlighting improving competence as a driver for improving safety. So our mission around competence hasn't changed. And the need for those working within industry to take up the challenge and affect that change has not gone away. We need to build on what we've done and continue to move forward. And as Thuria said in her speech, in her presentation, it's not enough to sit back and think that the work has already been done. Now, we absolutely haven't been sitting back. We have been cracking on, and we've been doing lots of work across the competence space. And that's with ASFP's membership and also beyond that membership to address competence in the wider sector as well. So with that in mind, let's have a look at what we have been doing. Well, the work that we've been carrying out is cross-cutting, but I think we can broadly split it into two areas or two sorts of bundles of things. The first one around representing the interests of the passive fire sector, and the second around creating supportive tools, services and frameworks. So if we think about representing interests first, the landscape around competence is still changing very quickly. And through that change, we've really been representing the interests of passive fire within all of the conversations that have been going on. And we've been working with the built environment, the regulatory bodies, the stakeholders, to make sure that the interests of the wider passive fire protection community are kind of front and centre in those discussions, rather than being peripheral to them. So we've been showing leadership within passive fire protection itself, but also within competence in general, by helping to set the direction of travel for competence. And within that, we're advocating for the needs of passive fire protection. We're making sure that passive fire protection is always part of the conversation and that the criticality of it is understood by everyone in the work that we're doing. And we're also collaborating. We're working with more external bodies than I think we ever have before to make sure that we're part of the bigger picture. We know we can't solve all of the competence-related issues in the built environment by ourselves, but we can work in collaboration with other people to make sure that we get more done. And I think that collaboration and advocacy also recognises that the interfaces between things are important, between those carrying out passive fire protection work and those doing work that's aligned to it in other areas. And we'll come back and look a bit more at the bigger picture in a second. Now, alongside that, we're also working to create tangible supporting frameworks, tools and services that will help our members and help the wider sector as well. So we're creating mechanisms to make it easier to meet the competence challenges that have been set out in legislation for both individual competence and organisational capability as well. So we're creating frameworks that articulate what it means to be competent and working with you to identify what standards for capable organisations look like. We're creating pathways and tools to allow demonstration of individual competence and mechanisms to show organisational capability. And we're also working out how competence should be maintained and how it can be maintained over time, which is a crucial part of the picture. The core of this competence work is that it's not once and done, it's that it's something that continues to be measured over time, so we can show that the workforce is operating effectively and safely. So in terms of representation and the work we've been doing there, what does that bigger picture look like? Well, the landscape around competence is very full. There's an awful lot of stuff going on. And there's lots of players that are all adding their expertise to address improvement of competence. Now, we know that the requirements for competence were brought front and centre into legislation, featuring explicitly within the Building Safety Act and in aligned and subsequent secondary legislation. And although the need for people to work safely and be capable of doing their jobs has always been there implicitly, or in some cases not so implicitly, this kind of brings it to the fore, and it's made it more front and centre in people's mind when they're thinking about what they need to do to keep their people safe, to make things run effectively, and to make their organisations work well. We've also seen, through the Building Safety Act, the institution of the BSR and other subcommittees and committees that sit underneath it that look to directly address individual competence and organisational capability. And I want to come back to that part particularly and tell you some things that we've been doing in that space a little bit later on. There are also other industry groups that are looking to address competence in their own areas or to pull together competence outputs from other places like passive fire. And that work sometimes interfaces with what ASFP is doing, as it's in closely related areas, or needs input from passive fire professionals. Things like work that the Construction Leadership Council is carrying out, or the Joint Competence Initiative for the Building Envelope sector, but also other trade associations that sit alongside ASFP or professional bodies that work in related areas. And we're working really closely with many of those groups to promote our work and encourage adoption of ASFP services, but also to help drive understanding of the importance and criticality of passive fire protection and early engagement as well. There's also a lot of work going on at the moment around kind of more formal standard setting in the sense of things like BSI standards for individual competence and organisational capability. Groups like BSI's CPB1, which has been instrumental in creating competence standards like BS 8670 Part 1, which was the code of practice for developing individual competence frameworks in the built environment, which is a really core pillar of all the competence work that we've been doing to date, but also standards like PAS 8671, 8672 and 8673, which are the competence requirements that have emerged for principal designer, principal contractor, and in building management. The newly emerging BS 8674 for fire risk assessors, which is out for consultation at the moment. And also another standard that's in development, BS 8670 Part 2, which is the standard for, or will be the standard for competence in construction product competence. All words to that effect in English. But really that piece is around construction products, and that builds on the great work that CPA did to look at standards for competence for construction products through the working group that they were involved in. And alongside that, CPB1 is also carrying out research into potential standards for organisational capability as well. Now, we've been supporting all of that work in one way or another. We're either helping with development or redevelopment or refinement of those standards, but we're also working to make sure that where principles are set out within those standards, we're looking at their relationship to our own work and building the principles, the guidance, the statements from those into what we're doing and mapping back where appropriate. There are also education and skills bodies that we need to think about as well. So they're the bodies that really help us to deliver a skills system, which is going to support our demonstration of competence and hopefully direct funding to where we need it. Groups like the sector skills bodies like CITB, people like IFATE, the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, which has responsibility for setting new apprenticeship frameworks, looking at funding of frameworks, but also increasingly around technical qualifications which contribute to competence in other ways. And then the newly introduced Skills England as well, which is going to have increasing responsibility in the coming years in this area. And we've been working closely with them to turn plans for competence into a reality, and through them feed into the bigger picture of what's going on in the sector to make sure that government's really aware of what we need from the skills system. There's also the organisations that kind of implement the requirements that come out of our competence work, awarding organisations, training providers, those kind of people who are instrumental in developing skills and assessing whether competence has been met in some of the areas that we're working in. And that includes things like existing registration schemes like CSCS, which make qualification achievements visible. They're all part of the same puzzle that we need to think about and we need to work with. And finally on this list anyway, there are other kind of standard schemes or pieces of guidance that exist that we're linking in with. So for example, we're looking at how the work of ASFP can help with evidencing for Build UK's Common Assessment Standard. And we're also supporting the redevelopment of competent person schemes as well. So those are the schemes that are designed specifically to allow tradespeople to self-certify certain building works within certain parameters. And where those are beginning to touch on passive fire, we're supporting the work to redevelop those to make sure that we're not creating an unintended way in for people to do fire stopping without the right competence, and that the competence requirements that we would expect of people in more specialist industries are reflected back in those frameworks as well. Now, that is almost certainly not exhaustive. I'm sure you'll be able to think of other work that's going on, but it gives you a flavour of how we're connected into all of those groups and initiatives and into that much bigger picture, and how we're working to influence across all of those areas and at every level to make sure that passive fire protection stays high on the agenda. So whilst you might see outputs from us that are very tangible, there's also a lot of work going on in the background in terms of making sure that we're connected in, we're helping to drive policy and change, as well as just being subject to it at the end of the day. And on that note, I just want to give a big thank you to all of our members. I'm sure there are a lot of you on this call today. We couldn't do this without your insight and your collaboration. And the engagement that we've seen from the sector has been absolutely phenomenal, and working with many of you in many different ways. And that has been so valuable in allowing us to make sure that we're getting this competent stuff right for you. So I said I wanted to come back to our kind of statutory committees and BSR piece of the puzzle, because as many of you may know, we've been doing quite a lot of work in this space. So in the wake of Grenfell, in the wake of the Hackett report, there were different groups of people that were set up throughout industry, or set themselves up throughout industry to try and address particular pieces of the puzzle. And one of those that was set up by the industry response group was CSG, the Competence Steering Group. And that was looking specifically about how the deficiencies in competence that were identified in the Hackett report could be addressed. And through its working groups and the sector groups underneath them, it's worked hard over the last few years to address competence in some really crucial areas. So, for example, we talked about the standards for principal designer, principal contractor. That's all kind of come out of CSG work. Now, we've been working with CSG for a long time, showing a lot of leadership, helping them to create supportive ways of working in terms of defining competence and implementing measures for competence, not just for the benefit of ASFP, but actually for those without ASFP's resources as well. But we've also been working outside that structure. Although CSG's done some great work, it's had to prioritise that work. And in some cases, their initial priorities didn't go far enough in terms of what we needed for passive fire protection. So we've also been working outside that to take forward our own competence requirements where they didn't have an existing home within CSG. And a really good example of that I'll talk to you a little bit about later is our work in passive fire design and specification. But in recent months, we've also been working with CSG to look at what the future might look like as well, and to influence how the competence work needs to evolve and how to ensure critical roles and activities are covered and that approaches to competence are joined up. So I want to talk to you about some of the changes that you'll see happening here, or that you might already have seen happening here. So the Building Safety Regulator was set up in direct response to the Building Safety Act, with a remit not just for building safety, but for promoting individual competence and organisational capability in the built environment. Now, the BSR had a statutory obligation to set up some committees that sit underneath it, one of which was specific to competence, the Industry Competence Committee, or ICC. So this was direct recognition that there needed to be additional support, additional thought put behind competence, and additional expertise taken into account, and that BSR needed external people that could support them and challenge them in this area. Now, the ICC formed in October 2023 to provide that advice and guidance to the BSR, but also to wider industry. And you'll see more starting to come out of the ICC over the next few months. Now, the CSG was already in place, but now the CSG has transitioned to be a formal subcommittee of the ICC, and it's now going to go by the name of the Industry Competence Steering Group, or ICSG. And that's led by Hannah Clark, who I'm sure many of you know through her day job at the CPA. Now, ICSG is in the process of restructuring. It's taken some time to look really clearly at what its existing scope and coverage is, what its sector-led groups are doing, what the working groups underneath them are doing, to try and ensure there's representation from across the built environment, to make sure that the places that weren't being addressed in terms of competence are now being addressed as part of that process, and bring in as many of those groups as possible to create a coordinated and joined up approach. And we've been supporting ICSG in its plans for restructure, and particularly looking at how the needs of those in the passive fire community can be best served by ICSG, particularly as we know that passive fire protection is often cross-cutting. It might form components of people's roles, but not necessarily the whole roles. But we need to make sure that it's also looked at as a consistent piece with some continuity between them. So I'm really pleased to say that as a result of those conversations, ASFP has been invited to form a new sector-led group that's specific to passive fire protection. And that's going to let us draw together everything that we've been doing through CSG and our wider competence groups in one place. So we'll lead collaboration across industry to make sure that appropriate competence requirements are put in place for passive fire protection, and that those working with interested organisations and those individuals that have an interest in this space are able to advocate for the specific needs of this sector more effectively. And this is a direct result of the work that ASFP and its members have put in, but also the engagement that we've seen from our wider audiences as well. But it's also, I think, an acknowledgement of the importance of passive fire protection and its criticality in terms of ensuring safety in the built environment. Now, it's really early days at the moment. We're working with ICSG to form that group and looking at how it interacts with other parts of industry. We'll be keeping all of our current working groups up to date with plans on this as we progress. But the important thing to know here is that this isn't just about ASFP. Although this is work that we'll be leading, that group won't just be formed from people that work within ASFP. It'll be formed from people across industry that have an interest in this space. So if you're interested in this, if you aren't working directly with us, but you want to be involved in this widening competence work, please do get in touch. You can see my email address there. You can contact me directly, and we'll be able to let you know how those plans are progressing and how you can get involved as we move forward with that sector-led group. Now, it's not all about the influencing, the communication, the scene setting work that we've been doing. We've also been working really hard to progress our creation of supportive frameworks, tools and services as well. And that won't stop while we get our sector-led group set up. We'll be continuing to work with you to set standards for industry, to put in place mechanisms for development and demonstration of individual competence, and looking at ways to support organisational capability as well. So I just want to give you a bit of a flavour of what we've been doing in that area too. Now, you can't demonstrate competence without setting out clearly what it means to be competent. So we need to set some really clear benchmarks for competence so that we have a shared understanding of what we're aiming for. So we've been working to develop frameworks for individual competence and to set out requirements for organisational capability. Now, in terms of individual competence, as we've talked about before, if you've been to one of these webinars before, our frameworks are activity-based rather than just looking at whole occupations. So that allows us to set out requirements for activities regardless of who's doing those activities and ensure a consistent standard. And this really plays into the point that I was making about passive fire protection being cross-cutting. We know then that we can pick those activities up, we can plug them in other places, and the same standard's been set regardless of how people are getting there. And that gives us a lot of flexibility to support those people whose whole job isn't necessarily completely about passive fire protection, but those who work with it as part of a wider role. And we're not just creating those standards and frameworks in isolation. We're also looking at how we can put routes to competence in place. So from an individual standpoint, that's looking at how people develop towards an evidence agreement of those, achievement of those individual competence standards, looking at how to package activities together, create training opportunities, and create opportunities to demonstrate skills and knowledge, and look at mechanisms that recognise experience and behaviour as well. From an organisational perspective, then, that's about how we work with bodies that already offer organisational certification, working with them to set common minimum standards for schemes, starting with the installer certification schemes. And in light of the Grenfell inquiry, it's more important than ever to validate and demonstrate competence. So we're also working on mechanisms to make competence visible and allow it to be checked. And they're key themes through all of the competence work that's going on. At an individual level, that means validating evidence of skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviour through individual registration specific to passive fire, and working with pilot organisations at the moment to develop and test processes to do that. And at an organisational level, we're working to ensure schemes meet common standards and have specific inclusions for passive fire, and as well incorporate demonstration of that individual competence, that workforce competence against the standards that we've set out with industry. Now, it's important to say here that we aren't doing this in isolation. We can't deal with competence on its own. It's very much wrapped together with industry guidance, industry standard setting, and we need to be very aware of that. So we've been working closely with Andy and his team to make sure that we're aligning with technical guidance and best practice, particularly the things that are identified through ASFP working groups, passive fire groups like PFPF and PFKG, but also wider national forums as well, so that we're linking back into the guidance that's available within this space already. Now, within this, I wanted to draw your attention particularly to a few things that we're doing, which are places where you can get involved and really support our work. So if we first look at setting benchmarks, we've been working with lots of stakeholders from across design and specification to set clear standards for competence for passive fire protection. Our stakeholder group there includes people from kind of right across the range of interest in design and specification, from architects and architectural technicians, people from manufacturers, fire engineers, specialist contractors, tier 1 contractors, and more. So we're trying to get as broad a range of views on that as possible. Our work here particularly focuses on REPA stages 3 and 4, so spatial coordination and technical design, where specialist passive fire expertise is required. So we're not looking at concept design, we're looking at the very specialist stuff that it's really focused where that expertise is needed. As with all our other standards, as I've already said, they're focused on activities rather than occupations. And that means we can develop those standards to be picked up and used regardless of who's completing the work, whether that's a specialist within a manufacturer or an architectural technician that wants to specialise in passive fire protection. We can ensure that they're meeting the same standard. And then part of the work that we're doing is looking at routes, different routes that people can go down to meet that standard depending on which sort of background they're coming from. So although the standard's the same, the routes to get there may differ. As a quick reminder, all of our standards are linked back to BSI 8670 Part 1. The work from the ICSG WG12 group for construction products competence that I mentioned earlier, and any other relevant standards that exist. Our standards, our competence standard that's been created and our SCEB statements have now been published in ASFP's online competence library, along our existing benchmarks of fire stopping, to gain a wider range of views. So if you have an interest in this area, please go and have a look. You can access the competence library using the QR code that's on screen or the URL that's there. We'd really like you to take a look and give us some feedback if you have an interest in this area. You can share your comments with me directly for my sins. Again, my contact email address is there. We'll take all of those comments away and discuss them with our working group further, and that might need to lead to some amendments to what we've put into that framework. But we're really at the stage now where we need some input from you and a steer. We've also been working with organisations from across sales and distribution to look at standards for competence in that area too. And these really focus on ensuring that individuals are able to provide information, advice, and guidance on products that's appropriate, but also that they know their limits and when to escalate the requests that they get. In addition to aligning these with 8670 Part 1 and particularly the CPC requirements, we've also looked at linking these with the Code for Construction Product Information clauses as well. So you can see where the statements that are in our framework help to support achievement of CCPI as an organisational measure. Now, these standards haven't been published yet, but they are due for publication imminently to get wider feedback. And again, as with the design and specification, we'd really welcome your feedback and your comments on those. So if you're interested in that area, drop us a note, let us know, and we'll make sure to let you know when they go live in our library as well. Now, in other webinars, I've spoken to you before about the work that we've done in the installation space, and that work hasn't finished in terms of setting benchmarks. All of this is very much a work in progress. So we're continuing to work on competence for fire-resisting ducts and dampers in collaboration with the Engineering and Building Services Skills Authority and BESA. And that includes smoke control ductwork and dampers as well. So we're collaborating with them to make sure that we're building in the engineering services requirements, but also that the passive fire requirements are front and centre in that work too. Before the end of the year, we'll be kicking off work to look at fire-resistant glazing and fire protection to the structural frame as well. So they're two new groups that we're looking to create. If you're an employer or you represent a sector body with an interest in either of those areas, so fire-resistant glazing, protection to the structural frame, and you want to get involved with that competence development work, please do let us know. Please get in touch and we'll pop you on our list. And then when we come to kick those groups off, we'll know exactly who to come back to for support. Now, I said alongside our standards development, we're also in the process of looking at routes to competence as well. And as part of that, earlier in the year, we launched our training recognition process. And this was, I guess, in recognition, to overuse that word, in recognition that there's lots of really great third-party training out there, and we need to understand how that fits in with the competence picture. So our training recognition process really looks at the quality of providers and their training to ensure availability of high quality training specific to passive fire protection. It's really an independent measure of training provision. It's based on quality, but also on technical accuracy as well. So it looks at the quality of the training and the inclusions within it. And it links back where appropriate to our emerging competence standards as well. So we'll be able to see how the training that's out there contributes to the development of competence in passive fire protection. Again, there's a lot of information on our training recognition scheme online. You can apply for it now. You can use the QR code or the URL there if you want to access more information about it. But if you have training yourselves that you want ASFP to assess and endorse, and make its relationship to developing competence clear, or you use providers who are instrumental to your success that do a really good job for you, that you think need some recognition through this process as well, please do let us know. There are contact details embedded within that information, so you can get in touch with the right people and help us to build that bank of really good training and make it visible to the sector. Now, that's not everything we're doing. That's really good ways you can engage with us. But we do have other things going on as well. And just to give you a little flavour of that, we're working with CITB to update NOS, the National Occupational Standards, and create new qualifications that are specific to fire stopping. They'll set out, they'll link to the requirements that were set out by our fire stopping sector specialist group under CSG, and meet the standards of the fire stopping framework that was created last year. The idea there is to create a specialist pathway for fire stoppers, which evidences what they're really competent to do in a way that hasn't really been done before. We're also working with EBSA, the Engineering and Building Services Skills Authority, to look at new assessment approaches for ducts and dampers to make sure that people installing those have a modular, flexible way of evidencing their skills and knowledge throughout their working life. And we're starting to develop a process for evidencing initial skills and knowledge in design and specification as well, looking at how to put together training that people can access, but then also testing and assessment in the form of online knowledge assessment, but also scenario-based qualifications that test ability to apply skills and knowledge in design and specification as well. And we're working with early adopters to pilot approaches to evidencing experience and behaviour to round out our evidence of SCEB in our competence model. We also know that there are some people who don't necessarily require competence per se in passive fire protection, but they do need some understanding of it. They need to understand when to stop. They need to understand why engaging with passive fire protection professionals is critical. And they need to understand some of the basic considerations around passive fire that they need to take into account in their work. So we're also working to create a range of aligned awareness training, which you'll see emerging over the coming months. Our first piece of that is around awareness for designers. And should be piloting that very soon. So just a quick reminder, there's been an awful lot going on, and I always think it's really nice to do these webinars, to do these presentations where we look back at what we've done this year, but also what's coming up. We've got an awful lot done. There's still a lot to do in this space, and to do that, we need your help. So this is how you can get engaged with us. As a quick reminder, keep your eye on our online competence library, following the QR code on the left. Share your comments and your feedback with us on design and specification. Let us know if you're interested in supply and distribution and you want us to let you know when those are available, so you can give us some feedback on there as well. And you've got my contact details right there, so you can do that. And also look at your training, come to us, get it recognised so we can make it part of the overall picture of competence and competence development for passive fire. You can find all of the information online using the QR code on the right. Thank you. Any questions? Andy, I think you're going to handle those, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. I'm back again. We've got two, and there's two questions that have come in thus far, and the first one came in possibly a few slides before you talked about it. So the first question was for passive fire, what competencies and competent person schemes are there?
So there are no competent person schemes that are specific to passive fire. So you won't find one that's specifically for fire stopping, or one that is specifically for kind of installation of structural fire protection or anything like that. What is happening with the competent person schemes is that they want to make sure that fire stopping is included within some of those schemes as well. So that where, for example, you have electricians that are breaching compartmentation, where they're putting new cables through a hole, that there is a requirement within the competent person scheme to make sure that they can effectively fire stop that. So it's not that they're creating new schemes specific to passive fire protection, it's that there are elements of passive fire protection that they're trying to embed within them. And one of the things that ASFP is doing is not just making sure that the standard is right, that it meets the competent standards that we're setting out elsewhere, but also that we have an influence over the circumstances under which that is allowable under a competent person scheme, if you like. And this is much more Andy's thing than mine. I'm sure he could tell you more information about this. But for example, we want to ensure that where things are simple, that can be part of the picture. But where, for example, fire stops are extremely complex, they don't become part of that that sign off on the competent person schemes. We need those to stay with the specialists, or certainly with oversight, relevant oversight from building controls.
Yeah, because it's a really tricky one. You know, if you've got an electrician that's passing a cable through a block wall, and it's just a case of drilling a hole, passing the cable through, job done, then obviously that's a fairly simple fire stop to do. But if you've got an electrician that wants to send a cable and goes above the false ceiling and finds a whomping great fire bat seal, and can I put where in that can I, and how do I put a cable and what do I seal it with, is a completely different kettle of fish. And interestingly, having answered that, I would say, if you have a look, if you want to know what competencies we have defined, have a look on the website, and there was the QR code we had earlier on will take you to that, and but on the ASFP website you can find that, and that's been the outcome of a pan industry thing that we just the same correspondent has pinged away straight back at us with no competent person schemes. How do we ensure we are employing a competent supply chain?
So I think we need to be very careful about how we're using the term competent person scheme. So a competent person scheme is a very specific thing. And that is a scheme that is licensed by the government, that is run by a certification body, which allows tradespeople like electrician, plumbers, window fitters, those kind of things, to install things under self-certification without everything having to go through building controls approval. Now, they're limited to very particular types of work in very particular areas that are set out in a schedule of the building regulations. And there isn't any intention of the BSR or of anyone else to expand those across the board. They're really designed for kind of low volume, relatively low risk work. If you think about your fencer installers, if you had 10 windows replaced in your house and 10 people on your street were having the windows replaced at the same time, it's a massive burden for building controls to come out and look at every single one of those installations. So those schemes were designed to allow some of that work to take place without building control to come out and see every part of it. Now, that is one element of competence. It is a way that has been used to prove competence for a particular group of people in the past. And that will continue in those areas in which they operate. Outside of that, we're also developing other schemes that look at competence more generally. So there will be ways of developing competence in passive fire and ways of evidencing and measuring that through a combination of looking at the skills and knowledge that people have, through perhaps qualifications assessment or other assessment processes, in combination with the experience they have of actually being on site and carrying that work out, and evidence of the behaviour that they have. And all of that will lead to a specific passive fire registration, which will allow you to see what people have demonstrated and what they haven't. So I think this term competent person scheme has been kind of picked up and thrown around without people necessarily being really clear on what it means. So we have a raft of activity going on to look at how competence is demonstrated and made visible, a lot of which the ASFP is doing, but the competent person schemes per se are kind of a small subset of that approach.
I would further with the nature of the question, how do we ensure we're employing a competent supply chain? Obviously, one of the key tenets of the ASFP down the years has been that installers of passive fire protection should have third-party certification that covers their scope of their activities. And so, find an installer organisation that has a third-party certification for that's how we put as a caveat on our members that they should have that. And of course, one of the challenges with that is the levels of rigor in that certification. And one of the things that we're looking to do is increase and set minimum standards that covers that. Okay. I've got a couple of questions still available to us, Kate. The competence framework that's defined on the website. So we have the obviously we've got installers of mastic, etc. Which we are going to then look at and register the individual's competence against. Who stipulates the acceptable level of evidence that someone has met the scope statements as per written on the website?
So as part of the work that we do on standards development, we bring together kind of cross-industry groups of people. So I talked about the composition of our design and specification group, but we also have specialist groups for each of our installation areas as well. So it's not just one group that sits across the whole of installation. We have different working groups that cover different parts of that off with specialists in that particular area sitting on them. And they are people in the installation space that come from specialist contractors, they come from manufacturers, they come from employer representative bodies representing those kind of people. And also we have some kind of larger contractor representation on there and professional institution representation as well. And at the same time as those groups are looking at the standards, we also work with them to look at what acceptable routes to competence look like. So what evidence do they think needs to be put in place? And we look at that in outline and then we build that out in more detail. So it's not ASFP that are saying this is what the bar is and this is what is acceptable in industry. It's actually industry saying that. And we can work to refine that over time. So there are some things that we'll need to put in place now to allow transition to this new system. And there are things I'm sure that will develop further down the line. But the idea is that those benchmarks in terms of what the competence is and how somebody in outline can reach that, how they should evidence that, are developed by our industry working groups. And I think it's really important to say that for the installer groups, in fact, for all our groups, they're not just ASFP members, they're members from other organisations across industry as well that are contributing to this work.
Okay. And then there's, so that's, thank you for that. And then the last question I've got at the moment is, and I like this question, I'm going to be honest, I like this question because it's, I think, will we have training for principal contractors to help them demonstrate compliance in the site management of passive fire installers, i.e. identifying critical elements to validate?
So I think this is a really interesting question, and I think the answer to this should be yes. I absolutely think we should put something, Andy's nodding as well. I absolutely think we should put something in place in this space. So the way that principal contractor competence has been dealt with was through a specific working group that was under CSG, now ICSG. There's a group that's dedicated to principal contractors, and also a group that's dedicated to site supervision as well. And one of the things that we'll need to do through the work of our passive fire SLG is to make sure that we continue to link in with those people that are representing principal contractors and representing site managers and site supervisors. So we can make sure that passive fire protection is front and centre in their thinking. But I absolutely think there is a role for ASFP in providing clear training to principal contractors as part of their CPD that feeds into their broader competence requirements.
Agreed. I think that's something we need to look at. So there's something for us to have a discussion about next time. Next time we're having a chat about what when we run out of stuff to do with the current stuff we planned, we should add that one onto the list. And then there's one last. Oh, there's two just landed. One's just like first one is, are clients, developers, stakeholder roles considered under standards and frameworks? Given the large volume of design and build and frameworks projects, are the clients' teams fully informed on the relevance of establishing the competence of the design and client team? But I think that's stuff that we've been planning, if not competence stuff, framework stuff on. We're certainly setting some awareness training up that covers that very issue.
So more widely, if we think about outside ASFP work directly, there are some big discussions going on in ICSG around how clients, developers, and other stakeholders are develop the competence that they need to make sure that they are employing the right people to do the work. So there are huge conversations going on around that more widely, which we are engaged in within ICSG, but also I would say bigger than that within wider industry as well. And it's certainly something that ICC have talked about in relation to how do you make sure the end client knows enough to engage appropriate people to carry out this work. I think in terms of the questions disappeared, so I can't remember the end of it now, but I think I think it was about awareness of SCEB and the need for more competence at stages kind of 2 and 3. So it interfaces with concept design. I think that awareness is growing. There's acknowledgement within ICSG's design group that they need to not just be looking at principal designer, that there needs to be some focus on kind of design down the chain a little bit and more on the actual design competencies rather than just the kind of duty holding role, if you like. So a lot of those conversations are going on, and part of our job within our passive fire SLG will be to make sure that we're part of those discussions and we're feeding into them and we're looking for the right ways to make sure that that passive fire competence or the passive fire understanding is built back into what they're doing as well.
The last question that's come in is one about the competence of those doing design works that aren't architects. Limited. There are limited principal designer registers. For example, the REBA PD register, if it requires you to be a qualified architect to join because it's a REBA register. Are you aware of other registers for engineers, for example? And yes, I mean, IFE run a register for fire engineers, but this is an issue for main contractors who have a number of design managers who are not always architects. How do those who are not architects prove principal designer competency? Can I just say, I don't tend to mention people by name when they put questions on here. I can see who they are. If the questioner would like to get in touch with me by email, and I think they've got my email address, if it's who I think it is, we've got an industry. We run industry leaders meetings. We try to get people from across the industry round the table. And the next one of these is scheduled for November, and I would like to I'd like to sort of have one of the topics that we're discussing is how do people demonstrate competence of design to do this, and what do we need in that? And there's various bits and pieces within that group that I want to do. We're going to get we're going to do some work on sort of the necessary evidence of that, and also the PI cover, and get the PI people involved in that conversation. And I think I would like that particular questioner, knowing who I think it is, to be part of that conversation. So send me an email, and I'll make sure that we involve people, invite the right person in that meeting. Thank you very much for the question. We're working on it. Okay. And I think that's it then. That's it for our Q&A. Just as ever with these things, there's a last couple of slides from ASFP. He says,
yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. So we've a reminder for you all, if you've been on with us for the start today, the 26th of September, info@asfp.org.uk, and the office will sort you out a 1-hour CPD certificate. And then beyond that, a couple of things. As ASFP have been working to try and raise some money in honouring our member Brendan Pettit, who's suffering from motor neuron disease. We've been running a Seize September, encouraging people to get out and walk. We set ourselves a target of £5,000, and we have got 3,600 and a bit. So please, if get involved, please help us get involved in that and help us raise £5,000 for the Motor Neuron Association. And a reminder that our awards dinner is coming up It's in you see, they've done this. This is brilliant. They've given us a whole advert that tells us all the clever things that are going on, and doesn't give us the blooming date and the venue. It's at the end of November, and the venue is in Leicester, and you've got all these fancy things that the event promises there. Please, sort yourselves out and come and join us to make the event as successful as possible. Okay, and on that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time watching the webinar. We hope we found it useful, and if you've got any questions, she's been Kate Milford.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, and we'll hopefully see you all at the next one.